The telegram arrived at Grace Ellen's boarding house room like a death sentence, the words blurring through her tears as she read them for the third time that cold February morning in 1882. Grace stood by the narrow window of her rented room in Philadelphia, watching snow fall onto the cobblestone street below. The telegram trembled in her hands. Her uncle had arranged a marriage. A rancher in Montana Territory needed a wife, and her uncle, who had taken her in after her parents died of scarlet fever 2 years ago, had decided she would fill that role. There was no question, no discussion. Just an ultimatum: go willingly or be thrown out with nothing. She was 22 years old, and her life had just been sold to a stranger. The journey west took 3 weeks. Grace traveled by train, then stagecoach, watching the landscape transform from industrial cities to endless plains. She wore the same black traveling dress for days, her auburn hair pinned severely back, her green eyes hollow. The other passengers tried to make conversation, but she could barely manage pleasantries. What was there to say? That she was being shipped like cargo to a man she had never met. That her uncle had assured the rancher she was biddable and healthy as though she were livestock. The mountain air hit her lungs like ice when she finally stepped off the stagecoach in Hamilton, a small town nestled in the Bitterroot Valley of Montana Territory. The town consisted of a main street with a general store, a saloon, a church, a handful of other buildings, and maybe 40 residents on a good day. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still heavy with snow even though it was late March. A man approached her. He was older, perhaps 50, with a thick beard and calculating eyes. "Miss Grace Ellen?" "Yes." Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Name's Morton Hayes. I'm here to collect you for Mr. Irwin Zimmerman. He's waiting at his ranch about an hour's ride north." Grace felt her stomach twist. "I see." Morton loaded her single trunk onto a wagon without ceremony. She climbed up beside him, and they began the journey in silence. The road was rough, cutting through valleys where early spring grass was just beginning to show through the brown winter growth. Cattle grazed in the distance, and she spotted a few homesteads scattered across the landscape. "Mr. Zimmerman's a good man," Morton finally said. "Fair boss, keeps to himself mostly." Grace did not respond. What could she say? That she hoped this stranger would be kind, that she was terrified. The Zimmerman ranch appeared as they crested a hill. It was larger than she had expected, with a 2-story house that looked sturdy and well-maintained, a large barn, several outbuildings, and extensive corrals. Cattle dotted the surrounding fields, and she could see men working in the distance. Morton brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house. Before Grace could gather herself, the front door opened. The man who emerged was not what she expected. Irwin Zimmerman was probably 28 or 29, tall and lean with dark hair that needed cutting and blue eyes that seemed guarded. He wore work clothes, dusty denim and a worn shirt, and he moved with the easy confidence of someone who had spent his life working hard. He was handsome in a rough way, but his expression was carefully neutral as he looked at her. "Miss Ellen," he said, his voice low and even. "Welcome." Grace climbed down from the wagon, her legs unsteady after the long ride. She forced herself to meet his eyes. "Mr. Zimmerman." They stood there for a long moment, 2 strangers bound by an arrangement neither of them seemed entirely comfortable with. Finally, Irwin gestured toward the house. "Morton, bring the trunk inside. Miss Ellen, I imagine you would like to see your room." She followed him into the house. The interior was clean but sparse. The main room held a stone fireplace, a sturdy table with chairs, and a few pieces of functional furniture. No decorative touches, no warmth. It felt like a place where someone existed rather than lived. Irwin led her upstairs where a narrow hallway connected 3 bedrooms. He opened the door to one. "This would be yours. It has a good window, catches the morning light." Grace stepped inside. The room held a bed, a dresser, and a washstand, simple but adequate. She turned to face him, expecting him to say something about wedding arrangements, about when they would marry, about his expectations. Instead, Irwin said something that shocked her into silence. "I know you did not come here by choice." Grace stared at him. His expression had shifted slightly, showing something that might have been regret or perhaps just weariness. "Your uncle made the arrangements," Irwin continued. "He wrote that you were agreeable, but his letters had a tone that made me wonder. When you stepped off that wagon, I knew for certain. You have the look of someone being led to the gallows." Heat rushed to Grace's cheeks. "I apologize for my appearance. The journey was difficult." "No." Irwin held up a hand. "Do not apologize. I am not angry. I am saying that I will not hold you to an arrangement you did not want. Stay by choice, leave if you wish. I will not force you into anything." Grace felt dizzy. "I do not understand. It is simple. You are welcome to stay here, to rest, to figure out what you want. If you decide you want to return east, I will pay for your passage. If you decide you want to stay, we can discuss what that looks like. But I will not marry a woman who was sent to me against her will. My uncle said he would disown me if I refused." "Your uncle is in Philadelphia. This is Montana territory. What he thinks does not matter out here." Grace sat down on the bed, her mind reeling. She had spent 3 weeks preparing herself for a loveless marriage, for a life of duty and resignation. And now this stranger was telling her she had a choice. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you agree to the arrangement if you feel this way?" Irwin leaned against the doorframe. "I am not entirely blameless. I did respond to your uncle's letter. I did agree to the match. Truth is, running a ranch this size alone is hard. I thought having a wife would make sense, someone to share the work and the life. But I thought I would be marrying someone who wanted this life. When I realized that was not the case, well, it changed things. So what happens now? Now you rest. You eat. You take some time. I will sleep in the foreman's quarters in the barn. You will have the house to yourself in the evenings. During the day, I will be working the ranch. If you need anything, ask. No expectations, no obligations. Just time to figure out what you want." He left before she could respond, his boots echoing on the wooden stairs. Grace sat alone in the room, staring at the simple cotton curtains on the window. She had expected many things when she arrived in Montana, but kindness had not been one of them. The first few days passed in a strange, suspended state. Grace woke early, finding that Irwin had already left the house before dawn. He left coffee on the stove and fresh bread on the table, though she never heard him come in. She spent her mornings exploring the house, which had a surprising amount of potential beneath its austere appearance. The kitchen was well equipped, the pantry adequately stocked. In the afternoons, she would sit on the front porch, watching the ranch operations from a distance. Irwin worked alongside his ranch hands, fixing fences, tending cattle, breaking horses. He moved with practiced ease, clearly a man who knew his work intimately. Sometimes he would glance toward the house, but he never approached unless necessary. On the 4th evening, Grace decided to make dinner. She found beef in the cold cellar, potatoes, and some withered carrots that could still be salvaged. She prepared a stew, the process occupying her hands while her mind wandered. What did she want? She could not return to Philadelphia and her uncle's house. But could she truly stay here in this wild place with a man she did not know? When Irwin came to the house at sunset, he stopped in the doorway, surprise crossing his face. "You cooked?" "I did. There is plenty if you are hungry." He hesitated, then came inside, washing his hands at the kitchen pump. They sat at the table together, the first meal they had shared. The silence stretched, not quite comfortable but not hostile either. "The stew is very good," Irwin finally said. "Thank you. The kitchen is well supplied. My mother's doing before she passed. She always kept things organized." Grace looked up. "When did she pass?" "4 years ago. Fever took her quick. My father died the year before, thrown from a horse. It was just them and me running this place. Now it is just me and the hands." "That must be lonely." Irwin met her eyes. "Yes, it is." The admission hung between them, honest and unadorned. Grace felt something shift just slightly. This was not the man she had expected. There was no entitlement in him, no cruelty. Just a lonely rancher who had made a poor decision and was trying to rectify it. "I do not know what to do," Grace said quietly. "I have no skills for returning to a city. My parents were school teachers and I had some education, but I never trained for work. My uncle kept me essentially as an unpaid housekeeper after they died. Can you teach? I suppose. I can read and write well. I know arithmetic, some history and literature." Irwin nodded slowly. "Hamilton does not have a school. The children around here get no formal education. Some of the ranching families have mentioned wishing there was someone who could teach the basics. Are you suggesting I become a teacher here?" "I am suggesting it might be an option. You could live here, pay room and board through work around the house if you wanted, and teach children during the day. Or not. I am just saying there might be paths forward you have not considered." Grace absorbed this. The idea of teaching appealed to her. She had helped her mother sometimes, working with younger students. "I would need to meet the families, see if there is real interest. We could arrange that. There is a community gathering at the church in Hamilton next Sunday. You could come, meet people, see what they think." "Would that not cause talk? You bringing the woman who was sent to be your bride but is not your bride?" Irwin almost smiled. "This is Montana territory. People have seen stranger arrangements. Besides, the truth is usually better than speculation." Sunday arrived with clear skies. Grace wore her best dress, a dark green one she had packed carefully. Irwin drove them to town in a wagon, and Grace noticed that he had cleaned up as well, his hair trimmed, his clothes neat. He looked different in daylight, less weathered, younger. The church was small but well kept, and it seemed like the entire community had gathered. Grace felt eyes on her immediately, curiosity and assessment. Irwin stayed close, his presence steady beside her. After the service, a woman approached. She was perhaps 40, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "You must be Miss Ellen. I am Sarah Thompson. My husband and I run the ranch east of Irwin's place. Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Thompson. Call me Sarah. I heard you might be interested in teaching. We have 3 children who could desperately use proper schooling." Before Grace could respond, other families gathered. The interest was genuine. By the end of the morning, Grace had commitments from 7 families representing 15 children of various ages. The families offered to help convert an unused room in the church into a schoolroom and to provide supplies and a small salary pooled from their resources. "Seems you have a job," Irwin said quietly as they drove back to the ranch. Grace felt something unfamiliar. Hope. "It seems I do." "Does this mean you have decided to stay?" She looked at him. In the 2 weeks since she had arrived, she had watched him carefully. He kept his word about everything. He did not push, did not demand, did not impose. He worked hard, treated his ranch hands fairly, and gave her space to breathe. She did not love him, but she respected him, and respect was more than she had expected. "I think I would like to stay. Not as your wife, not yet, but as your tenant. I will pay room and board as we discussed, and I will teach." Irwin nodded. "That sounds fair. Spring deepened into early summer. Grace threw herself into teaching with an enthusiasm she had not felt in years. The children were eager, despite their varying levels of preparation. She taught reading, writing, arithmetic, and geography, working with each child at their level. The families were grateful, often sending food or small gifts in thanks. Living at the ranch developed its own rhythm. Grace took over the household tasks, cooking and cleaning, partly as her contribution and partly because she found satisfaction in making the house feel less stark. She added curtains, rearranged furniture, brought in wildflowers from the meadow. Irwin never commented, but she noticed he spent more evenings in the main house rather than the foreman's quarters. They talked more now. After dinner, they would sit on the porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Irwin told her about ranching, about the challenges of weather and market prices and predators. Grace told him about teaching, about the children's progress, about her growing affection for the wild landscape. One evening in June, as they sat together, Irwin said, "You have made this place feel like a home again." Grace looked at him. In the fading light, his face had lost its guardedness. "Have I? My mother used to say a house is just wood and nails until someone cares about it. You care about it." "I can tell. I suppose I do. It surprised me how much I have come to care about this place, about the work, about the people here." "Does that include me?" The question was quiet, almost hesitant. Grace realized that Irwin had become important to her. She looked forward to their evening conversations. She noticed when he looked tired or worried. She had started watching for him during the day, tracking his movements across the ranch without fully realizing she was doing it. "Yes," she said honestly. "It includes you." Irwin turned to her. "Grace, I know we started this in the worst possible way, but I think we have built something better. I would like to court you properly if you are willing. No obligations, no expectations beyond what you want to give. Just a chance to see if what I am starting to feel might be something you feel too." Grace's heart beat faster. "What are you feeling?" "Like maybe sending for a mail-order bride was not the mistake I thought it was, even if we threw out the original plan. Like maybe having you here, getting to know you, watching you bring life back to this place has been the best thing that has happened to me in years. Like I might be falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Grace reached out, taking his hand. It was work-roughened, warm, solid. "I would like that," she said. "I would like to be courted, and I think I might be falling in love with you too." Irwin smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face. He lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles, a gentle gesture that sent warmth through her. "Then we will take our time and do this right." Courting in the Montana territory was different from what Grace had known in Philadelphia. There were no chaperoned parlor visits or orchestrated social events. Instead, Irwin took her riding across the ranch, showing her the boundaries of his land, the best grazing areas, the creek where wildlife gathered at dawn. They had picnics on hillsides, talking for hours about everything and nothing. He brought her small gifts, a perfectly smooth stone from the creek bed, wildflowers tied with grass, a book he ordered from Helena because she had mentioned wanting to read it. She darned his shirts, packed him lunches for long days working the far pastures, and learned to make his favorite foods. The ranch hands noticed the change and approved. Morton, the ranch foreman who had picked Grace up that first day, told Irwin within Grace's hearing that he had never seen the boss so content. The families in Hamilton noticed too. Sarah Thompson commented to Grace that she had never seen Irwin Zimmerman smile so much. The community, which had initially been uncertain about Grace's ambiguous position, now fully accepted her. She was the teacher, Irwin's intended and a valued member of their small society. Summer brought hard work. Irwin and his men drove cattle to higher pastures, fixed miles of fence, broke new horses. Grace continued teaching through the summer months, working with the children on reading skills they would need. In the evenings, she and Irwin were inseparable. One night in late July, they sat by the creek on the ranch property, the water burbling over rocks while stars emerged overhead. Irwin had his arm around Grace, and she leaned into his warmth. The physical affection had grown gradually between them, each touch meaningful. "Grace," Irwin said quietly, "I want to ask you something." She looked up at him. "Yes, will you marry me? Not because your uncle arranged it, not because of any obligation, but because you want to, because you love me and want to build a life together." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "Yes. Yes, I will marry you." Irwin kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and Grace responded with equal fervor. She had never imagined that the forced arrangement would lead to this. Genuine love, real partnership, a future she actually wanted. They married in August in the small church in Hamilton, with the entire community attending. Grace wore a dress that Sarah Thompson helped her make, simple but beautiful white cotton with lace at the collar. Irwin wore a new suit ordered from Helena, looking handsome and nervous as Grace walked down the aisle. The vows felt sacred, spoken with full hearts and honest intention. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Irwin kissed Grace with a tenderness that made several of the women sigh happily. The reception was a community affair, held in the churchyard. There was food, music, dancing. Grace danced with Irwin, then with many of the ranchers and townsmen, feeling welcomed and cherished. This was her community now, her home. That night, they returned to the ranch house as a married couple. Irwin carried Grace over the threshold, both of them laughing. Inside, he set her down gently, his expression turning serious. "Are you happy?" he asked. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," Grace answered honestly. "When I arrived here, I thought my life was over, but it was actually just beginning." I felt the same. I thought bringing a bride out here was a practical decision. I never expected to find someone who would make me feel alive again. They went upstairs together, to the room that had been Grace's and was now theirs. The intimacy between them was tender and passionate, a physical expression of the love that had grown steadily over the past months. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Grace's head on Irwin's chest, his hand stroking her hair. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too." More than I thought possible. The seasons turned. Grace continued teaching through the fall, watching her students' progress with pride. At home, she and Irwin fell into an easy partnership. They worked together seamlessly, whether managing the household or making decisions about the ranch. Irwin valued Grace's opinions, often discussing his plans with her and genuinely considering her input. Winter came harsh that year. Snow fell heavy, and temperatures dropped brutally low. The ranch work became about survival, keeping the cattle fed and protected, ensuring the horses had shelter, maintaining the buildings against the wind and cold. Grace kept the house warm, prepared hearty meals, and waited anxiously when Irwin had to go out in dangerous conditions. One night in January, a blizzard struck with terrifying intensity. Irwin and his hands had been out checking on the cattle in the far pastures. As night fell and they had not returned, Grace's anxiety turned to fear. She kept coffee hot, the fire blazing, and watched the white wall of snow beyond the window. Near midnight, she heard sounds outside. She rushed to the door, opening it to find Irwin and 3 of his men struggling through the drifts. They were ice-covered, exhausted but alive. Grace and the ranch hands' wives, who had gathered at the main house to wait, helped get the men inside, stripping off frozen outer clothes, pressing hot coffee into numb hands. Irwin pulled Grace aside once he could speak. "Lost 20 head in a ravine. We tried to get them out, but the snow was too deep." "I do not care about the cattle," Grace said fiercely. "I care that you are alive." He pulled her close, and she could feel him trembling, though whether from cold or emotion she could not tell. "I had to come back to you. That is all I could think about out there." The blizzard lasted 3 days. Grace kept everyone fed and warm, turning the main house into a refuge. When the storm finally broke, the landscape was transformed, buried under feet of snow. The work of digging out was exhausting, but the community came together, helping each other recover. Spring arrived like a blessing after that hard winter. As the snow melted and green returned to the valleys, Grace discovered she was pregnant. She told Irwin one evening in April, nervous about how he would react. His face lit up with joy. "A baby, we are going to have a baby. Yes, I think sometime in early November." Irwin swept her into his arms, spinning her around. "This is the best news. A child, Grace. Our child." The pregnancy progressed well through the summer. Grace taught until July, when the families insisted she rest. Sarah Thompson and the other ranch women took over, ensuring Grace did not overwork herself. Irwin became almost comically protective, constantly worried that Grace was doing too much or needed something. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Grace told him one afternoon when he tried to prevent her from carrying a basket of laundry. "I know. I just want you and the baby safe." Grace softened, touching his face. "We are safe. I am healthy and strong. Women have been having babies forever. But this is our baby, and you are my wife. I get to worry." In late October, as the aspen trees turned gold on the mountains, Grace went into labor. Sarah Thompson and another experienced ranch wife, Martha Klein, attended her, along with the doctor from Hamilton. Irwin paced outside the bedroom, wearing a path in the floorboards. After many hours, as the sun set behind the mountains, a baby's cry filled the house. Sarah emerged, beaming. "Irwin, come meet your son." Irwin entered to find Grace exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle. He approached slowly, awe on his face. Grace pulled back the blanket to reveal a red-faced, dark-haired infant. "Our son," she said softly. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names, but now, looking at the baby, Irwin said, "James, after your father." Grace's eyes filled with tears. Her father had been James Ellen, a good man who had died too young. "James Zimmerman. It is perfect." Irwin carefully took the baby, cradling him with surprising gentleness for such a rough-handed rancher. "Hello, James. I am your father, and I promise to take care of you and your mother forever." Grace watched her husband hold their son, and her heart felt so full she thought it might burst. 2 years ago, she had arrived in Montana against her will, terrified and resentful. Now she had a husband she loved deeply, a son, a community, and a life beyond anything she had imagined. The months after James's birth were exhausting but joyful. Grace discovered that motherhood came naturally to her, though the sleepless nights were challenging. Irwin was a devoted father, taking the baby whenever possible to give Grace rest, talking to his son constantly, even though James was too young to understand. The community embraced the new baby. Families brought gifts, food, offers of help. Grace realized how much she had become part of this place, how deeply these people cared for her and her family. When spring came and James was 5 months old, Grace announced she wanted to return to teaching. Some of the women worried it was too soon, but Grace was determined. She arranged for Sarah Thompson to watch James during school hours, and she returned to the classroom. The children were delighted to have her back, and James became something of a community baby, passed around during social gatherings, spoiled by everyone. He was a happy child, quick to smile, With his father's blue eyes and his mother's auburn hair, time flowed steadily. James grew from baby to toddler to young boy. Grace and Irwin's love deepened with each passing year, growing from that first passionate romance into something sturdy and enduring. They had disagreements, of course, moments of frustration or worry, but they always talked through problems, always chose each other. When James was 3, Grace became pregnant again. This time she was less nervous, knowing what to expect. In the spring of 1887, she gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, after Irwin's mother. Rose was quieter than James had been, more observant but equally loved. The ranch prospered. Irwin made smart decisions, improving the breeding stock, expanding the land. Grace's teaching continued, and she became a pillar of the Hamilton community, organizing social events, helping new families settle, providing education that shaped a generation of children. In 1889, Montana became a state. There was a massive celebration in Hamilton, with the entire territory feeling the excitement of official statehood. Grace and Irwin took their children to the festivities, feeling proud to be part of this moment in history. Years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. James grew into a responsible boy who loved the ranch, following his father everywhere, learning the work from an early age. Rose was more scholarly, loving books and questions, reminding Grace of her own childhood. When Grace was 35 and Irwin 41, they had a third child, another boy they named Thomas. He was a surprise, arriving 10 years after Rose, but he was welcomed with joy. By then, James was 14 and already working as a real ranch hand. Rose was 10, helping Grace teach the younger students. One evening, when Thomas was 2 and playing on the floor while James read and Rose drew, Grace and Irwin sat on their porch watching the sunset. It had become their ritual over the years, this quiet time together after the day's work was done. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Irwin asked. "When you arrived and wanted to be anywhere but here," Grace laughed softly. "I think about it often. I was so angry, so scared. I thought being sent here was the worst thing that could happen to me. And now I know it was the best thing. If my uncle had not sent me here, if you had not given me the choice to stay or leave, I would never have found this life. I would never have found you." Irwin took her hand, a gesture worn smooth by 2 decades of repetition. "I was terrified that day. I knew I had made a mistake agreeing to the arrangement. When I saw you step off that wagon, looking so miserable, I knew I could not go through with it. But I also could not let you leave without at least giving you a chance to decide for yourself. Stay by choice, leave if you wish." Those words changed my life. They changed mine too. You chose to stay and you gave me everything I did not know I was missing. Love, family, a real home. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned orange and pink, then deep purple. Inside, their children played peacefully. Across the ranch, the cattle settled for the night. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. Grace leaned her head on Irwin's shoulder. "I choose this every day. I choose you, this life, this place, every single day. And I choose you, always." The years continued their steady march. James eventually took over more of the ranch operations, proving to be as skilled and dedicated as his father. At 21, he married a local girl named Elizabeth Turner, bringing new life and energy to the ranch. They built a house on the property, keeping the family close while giving the young couple independence. Rose pursued teaching with even more passion than Grace had. She went to the new teachers' college in Missoula for 2 years, then returned to Hamilton to take over the school when Grace decided to retire at 48. Rose was an inspired teacher, expanding the curriculum and even starting a small lending library. Thomas grew into a thoughtful young man, different from his brother and sister, more interested in numbers and business than ranching or teaching. When he was 18, he began helping manage the ranch finances and proved to have a gift for it. He talked of eventually studying law or business, and Grace and Irwin encouraged his ambitions. Grace and Irwin aged gracefully together. In their 50s, they stepped back from the hardest work, letting the younger generation take over while they focused on being grandparents. James and Elizabeth had 4 children over the years, and Rose married a school teacher from Missoula and had 3. The ranch house rang with the sound of grandchildren during holidays and Sunday dinners. One evening in the summer of 1904, Grace and Irwin sat on their porch as they had thousands of times before. Grace was 64 now, her auburn hair liberally streaked with silver. Irwin was 70, still strong but moving more carefully than he once had. They held hands, watching their grandchildren play in the yard while James and Elizabeth supervised. 22 years, Grace said quietly. 22 years since I arrived here on that wagon, certain my life was ending. Instead, it was beginning, Irwin said, because you gave me a choice. You let me stay by choice, leave if I wished. That choice made all the difference. You made all the difference, Grace. You chose to stay, chose to build this life with me. Everything good in my life came from that choice you made. Grace looked at him, at the man she had grown old with, whose face was as dear to her now as on their wedding day. I would choose you again. In every lifetime, in every circumstance, I would choose you. Irwin brought her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. And I would choose you, forever. They sat as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors, surrounded by the family and life they had built together. Grace thought of that frightened young woman who had arrived so long ago, angry at the world, feeling powerless and lost. She wished she could tell that young woman that everything would be all right, that the journey against her will would lead to a destination beyond her dreams. But perhaps that young woman needed to take that journey, needed to discover that even in the worst circumstances, there could be choice. That even when life seemed decided by others, you could still find agency. That love could grow from the most unpromising beginnings into something strong and lasting. The evening deepened. The grandchildren were called inside for supper. James came to the porch to see if his parents wanted to join the family meal, but Irwin waved him on. We will be in shortly. Your mother and I are enjoying the evening. James smiled, understanding. He had grown up watching his parents' love, had seen their partnership, and it had shaped his own marriage. Take your time. When they were alone again, Grace sighed contentedly. I am so grateful for what? For everything. For you giving me freedom when I expected chains. For choosing me every day. For our children and grandchildren. For this life we built from such an impossible beginning. Irwin stood, pulling Grace gently to her feet. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close as they had held each other thousands of times over the decades. We built it together. Every part of it. You brought life and love and warmth to a cold, lonely place. You made everything better. You made me believe I could have a choice, could have a voice. You respected me before you loved me, and that respect became the foundation of everything. They swayed slightly together, dancing to music only they could hear. There on the porch, as twilight settled over the Montana landscape, they both loved. Inside, their family waited. Their children, grown and accomplished. Their grandchildren, bright with promise. The legacy of a love that had started with uncertainty, but had grown into something unshakable. Grace pulled back slightly to look at Irwin's face. Even with the lines of age, she saw the man who had told her she could stay by choice or leave if she wished. The man who had given her freedom instead of demands. The man who had courted her properly, loved her deeply, and built a life with her that exceeded every dream. "I love you," she said, as she had said thousands of times before. "I love you too," Irwin replied, as he had replied every time. Today and always. They went inside together, into the warm house full of family and laughter, into the life they had created. The evening star emerged above the mountains, bright and steady, watching over the ranch that had become the home of an unlikely love story. Grace had been sent against her will all those years ago, a bride in name but not in spirit. But Irwin had said she could stay by choice or leave if she wished, and in that offer of freedom, they had found something rare and precious. They had found real choice, real partnership, real love. And Grace had stayed, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Every day for the rest of her life she chose to stay, chose to love, chose the life she and Irwin had built together in the wild beauty of Montana. It was a good choice, the best choice. And she never regretted it for a single moment. Years later, when their great-grandchildren would ask about how Grace and Irwin met, the family would tell the story of the bride who was sent against her will, and the cowboy who said she could stay by choice or leave if she wished. They would tell how respect became friendship, friendship became love, and love became a legacy that shaped generations. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through the years. The house where Grace had first arrived, frightened and alone, became a home filled with memories of love and laughter. And every generation remembered the story of their ancestors, who had turned an unwanted arrangement into a beautiful love story, who had chosen each other every day, and who had proved that even the hardest beginnings could lead to the happiest endings. Grace and Irwin lived long lives, blessed with health and surrounded by family. When Grace was 76, she passed peacefully in her sleep, with Irwin holding her hand. He followed 2 years later, his heart finally giving out, but those who were there said his last word was her name. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a simple stone that read, "Grace and Irwin Zimmerman." She stayed by choice. He loved by choice, together forever. And in the town of Hamilton, Montana, in the state they had watched being born, their story lived on. The teacher and the rancher, the bride sent against her will and the cowboy who set her free. A love story for the ages, born in the Wild West, grown through respect and choice, lasting beyond lifetime into legend. It was a story of how freedom and love are intertwined, how the greatest gift you can give someone is the power to choose, and how the strongest marriages are built on mutual respect and daily choice. Grace chose Irwin and Irwin chose Grace, and from that simple, powerful choice came a life rich with meaning, full of love, and complete in every way. The end of their story was not sad but triumphant. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and left a legacy that would shape their family for generations. The house stood strong, the ranch prospered, and the descendants of Grace and Irwin carried forward the values they had embodied: respect, choice, hard work, and above all, love. On summer evenings, when the sunset painted the Montana sky in brilliant colors, family members would gather on that same porch where Grace and Irwin had spent so many evenings together. They would tell the old stories, remember the ancestors who had built this legacy, and feel grateful for the love story that had started everything. And sometimes, when the light was just right, and the mountain air carried the scent of wildflowers, it seemed like Grace and Irwin were still there, still choosing each other, still building their forever, still proving that the greatest love stories are the ones where both people choose freely, stay willingly, and love completely. The legacy of the bride sent against her will and the cowboy who offered her freedom lived on, a testament to the power of choice, the beauty of respect, and the enduring strength of true love. It was a story that began with fear and compulsion, but transformed into something beautiful through kindness and mutual regard. It was a reminder that how a story begins matters far less than how the characters choose to write it together. And in the wild, beautiful landscape of Montana, under the endless sky and among the strong mountains, the love of Grace and Irwin Zimmerman remained eternal, a beacon for anyone who believed that real love comes from choice, grows through respect, and lasts forever through commitment. Their story was complete, their love fulfilled, their legacy secure. From an unwanted beginning came a beautiful middle and a perfect ending. From compulsion came choice. From fear came love. And from two strangers bound by circumstance came a partnership that defined what marriage could be at its very best. Stay by choice. Leave if you wish. Those simple words had changed everything, had given Grace the freedom to choose her own path, and that path had led to a lifetime of happiness. The greatest gift Irwin ever gave Grace was her freedom. And the greatest gift Grace ever gave Irwin was choosing to stay and build a life with him. Together, they proved that love cannot be forced but must be chosen day after day, year after year, until death itself could not part them because their love had become woven into the very fabric of the land they called home and the family they had created. It was a good life, a full life, a life worth living. And when the final chapter closed, Grace and Irwin could rest knowing they had done it right, had loved well, and had left the world better than they found it. Their story ended not with sadness but with satisfaction, not with regret but with gratitude, not with loss but with the understanding that their love would continue in every child, grandchild, and great-grandchild who carried their blood and their values forward. The bride who was sent against her will found freedom, love, and home. The cowboy who offered choice found partnership, family, and fulfillment. Together, they found everything that mattered, and that was the perfect ending to their beautiful story.